Joe here at Reds, talking about an important subject today, and that is how to set up your Trout Spey rod. So two-handed fishing is new to a lot of people, and there's a lot of gear out there, and it can be really confusing getting set up right. Number one is use us if you have any questions. So my goal here is to get you educated enough to make your own decisions, put together a nice outfit, and then get out and use it. But contact us, call us, email us, you need any help, reach out. We're gonna answer the phone and you get to work with a real life person here at Reds. A novel concept. Okay, when it comes to Trout Spey, first question is why Trout Spey? It looks cool, it's fun to cast, you can throw a long ways, all that's fine and great. But from an extremely pragmatic standpoint, Trout Spey, using a two-handed rod that's longer and a Skagit style line system, and I'll explain what that is here in a minute, allows you to take flies like this right here and heavy fast sink tip lines and make it really fun and easy to sling streamers to some distance and then get a swinging presentation and current. So spey fishing is best done in moving water. If you have access to a relatively large or even a mid-sized stream, spey fishing might be just for you. It's a great way to polish your game. That way if you find yourself on a steelhead river or a salmon river someday, where two-handed fishing is the norm, you'll already have some A-game to back it up and get some fish. Okay, so when it comes to choosing a rod, we're gonna start like we choose all rods, and we're gonna examine where we fish, and we're gonna choose rod weight and length is gonna be the first things we talk about before we even talk about brand. But fortunately with spey fishing, for trout, it's a pretty narrow window. So first off, Trout Spey rods and the term switch rod are used pretty much synonymously. These little two-handers for spey light or Trout Spey, which could mean smallmouth spey, it could mean all sorts of different things, are gonna fall in the 2 to 4 weight category. Once we get to that number 5, that's reserved for like light summer steelhead, Alaskan rainbows, big Montana brown trout, or other places where we're slinging big flies for bigger fish. So really the sweet spot's like 2 to 4 weight when it comes to spey fishing. Length is going to be kind of topping out around 12 feet. The longest Trout Spey rods are maybe 12.5 feet, but typically most of them are going to be sub 12 feet, like the Loomis short spey here at 11 foot 11 inches, actually kind of on the long end. The longer the two-hander, the easier it is to pick up sink tips and achieve distance with ease for a newbie. The bottom end of the Trout Spey rod length range is going to be right around 10.5 feet, okay? Those shorter rods are great for small rivers where we're slicing casts either underhanded or cutting up under canopies, okay? So if you're on a little river and you want to sling streamers like this up under the brush on the far side with accuracy, a shorter rod's going to be better for you. But most rods are going to fall right in that 11 to 11.5 foot category for Trout Spey. Now when it comes to rod weight, common ranges are going to be 2 to 4 weight for most spey applications or spey light applications. Biggest determining factor there is going to be fly size. A 3 weight Trout Spey like this, I can land fairly large fish on this by using a low rod angle and really getting down after the fish. But where the 4 weight steps in nicely is when it comes to slinging double bunny dolly llamas with cone heads on them like that. A 4 weight rod is going to be more capable. It's going to have a heavier line associated with it, and it's going to be able to catapult those flies over and get it done much better than a 3. Now, fly selection becomes really critical, and I'm not going to get too far down in the weeds here, but this being on the heavy end, Skagit style lines are going to be required to cast these flies over here with cone heads, dumbbell eyes, and some weight. The more weight your fly holds and the more water it holds, like with this rabbit, the harder it is to cast. When you get started in Trout Spey, we need to be throwing micro zonkers or extremely sparse little flies that are unweighted. They cast. This fly here would add an instant 25 to 40% distance over this fly here. Instant, just by changing flies. That fly will sail that much better because it will come out of the water with more velocity. It'll dry out faster. Little micro leeches are very common. My favorite Trout Spey flies are typically going to be easier to cast, more sparsely dressed. Even though the skittish smolt has a cone head on it, it doesn't hold any water, and therefore the instant it pops up out of the water and takes flight, it dries out. On the other end of the spectrum are soft tackles. You can swing soft tackles and other swimming nymphs like these right here. And you could use a very light taper like a Scandinavian style line. More on lines in a minute. But this whole array right here is going to be what you're fishing. If you're fishing mostly soft tackles and little flies, a 2-weight works great. A 3-weight works great. If you're swinging for big brown trout in the upper Madison in the fall, maybe you want something that can turn over a big double bunny like the Dalai Lama, get a number 4. Okay, so we've chosen rod weight, we've chosen length. Now we're gonna look, do we have a favorite brand? If you have a favorite brand, just start there. All the Spey rods we sell at Reds are great. There's a bunch of different ones to choose from. Brand loyalty is a big deal. So when it comes to that, if you're not loyal by brand, probably jump over to budget next. We have a great selection of rods linked in the video description below. Just filter them by price, find something in your price range, do a little research, and start to move from there. Don't get too caught up in exactly what rod you're gonna get, but the more you spend, the more you get. They're gonna cast better, they're gonna hold up better, and you won't wind up buying it twice. Okay, moving on. All right. So we've chosen the rod. Here we are. We've got this rod. Now what? We've got to put a reel on it. We've got to get a line. The reel I'm going to try to go through pretty quick, but I want to explain a few things so that you get set up right. This reel is designed for a 7-weight single-handed rod. This is an older version of a Lamson Speedster HD. Okay. We want a reel that's approximately appropriate for a 6 or 7-weight rod for a 3-weight Spey, because we need some weight to help this balance. And when I'm making these two-handed casts and I put a load into it, if we have the appropriate amount of weight here and more weight, it's going to stabilize my whole cast, making it smoother and more consistent. I want some mass there. I'm not going to get into number of ounces. Just trust me when I tell you, a full frame reel, and I'll explain that in a second, approximately 7-weight is going to be kind of your sweet spot. Now, when I say full frame, for Spey fishing, here's what I'm talking about. Okay, I'm going to pop this reel off. A full frame reel is just that. The reel frame itself contains the line. So this skinny little running line here, and if you're worried about what line to get, hang on. I'll get there in just a minute. This skinny little running line is contained right here inside there so that it can't get pinched or jammed in that connection between the reel and the spool. And that's a full frame reel. I'm going to show you an example of a non-full frame reel. We use non-full frame reels quite a bit. This is a Reddington Behemoth. This is off one of our class rods. It's a non-full frame reel. And what I want to show you is there's a gap right here between the reel and the spool. And the skinny little running line can get stuck in that gap, and it can actually get pulled through there around the other side. So you're fishing 1 minute and your line's coming out the appropriate side, and then pretty soon it's coming out the wrong side, and you're like, how did that happen? Some demon, you know, unstrung my rod and moved it through there. Well, it actually pulls through there. What's a bigger risk is that skinny little running line, and I'll talk about what running lines, pros and cons of running lines here in a minute, is it can get damaged and stuck in there. And so that's really a bigger threat, is it gets jammed in there a couple times, gets abraded, now you've weakened your running line. So let me tell you what happens, okay? So you weaken your running line a couple times, it gets jammed in there, it's damaged, and then you send that beautiful long cast across the river and you snag up on a stick. You think it's a big fish and you give it a good hook set, yeah, like that, and you're snagged up. Well, now it's kind of do or die. You've got to point at it and you've got to bust that, hopefully, leader. Well, what I see happen from time to time, I see about every 2 years, the running line ends up snapping because it's been jammed in that connection right there too many times, and it got weakened. And it'll happen when you're pulling line off the reel. It'll happen when you least expect it. So full frame reels are in general a good idea. Not essential, but that's kind of why we like them. All right, so full frame reel is good, contains that skinny little running line, especially if you're using monofilament running line, which I'll talk about here in a minute. Now, there's a link to a whole collection of Trout Spey reels. Okay, there's a link to collection of Trout Spey rods. There's a link to collection of Trout Spey reels in the video description there. We have a huge inventory. We ship all over the world every day, yada, yada, yada. Buy it from us. One more reel I'm going to show you. There are reels that are Trout Spey specific. There's one from Sage, which is kind of like, so this is the Sage Trout Spey reel, and it's got a really classy design with a bunch of modern, conveniences. Stacked carbon fiber disc drag reel. and it's got a really nice full frame design right there, and it's just weighted really well, and it's got a lot of capacity for those thick Skagit shooting heads and running line that we're going to end up putting on there. So just kind of a shout out to that. That's a nice product. And then any of the lamps and HD stuff, the HD just should be FF or full frame, but HD stands for, you know, heavy duty, and full frame lamps are great too. So you've got your rod, you've got your reel, you're ready to go. Now we need to line it up. Now the line has a profound impact on performance, okay, for a couple of different reasons. The line has to be balanced well with the rod. Spey fishermen talk in grains, not rod weights, okay, because a 3-weight that's 11 foot 11 inches like this is going to be very different than, say, a 3-weight that's 10 foot 3 inches with a slightly different taper. Sage makes a much shorter they make a couple of different options in the same line weight. They make a 3-weight that's short in Trout Spey, they make a 3-weight that's long in Trout Spey. Those two rods are going to require different grain weights in order to perform optimally. So we talk in grains, not to freak you out, but we're going to set up each rod appropriately, okay? And you can use, we have an outfit builder for Spey rods as well. Click through and Spey line recommendations will come up in that outfit builder that are pretty darn good. So if you ever have any questions, just contact us. And we also won't ship a Trout Spey rod that's not set up well. Our whole team knows Trout Spey. They're going to set it up right. But let's talk about lines for a second. 90% of the rods we set up for Trout Spey are going to have Skagit style lines on them. Okay, Skagit style lines, they're really short, they're really heavy, and they're designed to make it really easy to throw sink tip lines and weighted flies. It's the bottom line. That's Skagit if I had to define it. Heavy lines for heavy sink tips and heavy flies. Okay, very easy to cast, very user-friendly. Scandinavian style lines, there's not a lot of folks. If you're watching this video and you're wondering about Scandinavian style line, you probably, definitely not your first Spey line. They're much harder to cast. They don't deliver big flies very well. They don't deliver sink tips very well. Scandinavian style lines are great for sending that fly 80 feet. Okay, that's what Scandinavian style lines are for. They make up a very tiny fraction of the Trout Spey fishing community. What is going to be most user-friendly and effective for you is going to be a Skagit style head, anywhere from 12 to 15 feet long, depending on the exact model. What it has is going to come in several parts, okay? This is where I want to make sure I go slow. And I want to talk about the anatomy of a Trout Spey line. So the very skinny part on the back is the running line. This just gets a free flight. It's very thin, very light, meant for that head to shoot all the way across the river and tow this behind it, shooting out through the guides. Okay, there are a couple of different types of lines. This is the end of my running line, and it turns bright orange. Okay, and then it's connected to my shooting head with a loop-to-loop connection. Okay. So this is a running line, this is a shooting head. There are some models of lines that are interconnected, and that's a seamless transition. Same line, just welded together, just seamless transition. Those are contiguous lines or one-piece lines. Integrated. There's an OPST Commando Smooth, and then Rio has a couple of other products too, and they're a one-piece line. Those are really great for folks that are going to Spey cast and then strip retrieve flies. Really great for that. Integrated lines are wonderful products, and they're great for folks that are going to strip retrieve. If you're going to be swinging flies in current and stripping up, casting out, and letting the current swing through like most of us are, a modular system where we can disconnect those is really handy, because now what I can do is, I'm just going to show you how this works, is I could change this shooting head from one rod to another or one season to another. And I don't want to get ahead of myself here, because this could wind up being confusing. But I can take this head off and I can actually put on a different head. Maybe I want a head that sinks a little faster. Maybe I want to use it on a different rod, or maybe I just not in love with the way the rod's casting and I want to try a different head. So what I can do is I can take this shooting head off and I can unhook it and take it off of this running line right here, right now. And I could put this in my pack and put a different head on this right here. I could use a 3-weight Trout Spey rod, and I could take that same reel and running line and I could put it on a 5-weight Trout Spey rod. You don't have to do that right away, but it just gives you the option of being able to disconnect it. The other option that it gives you is maybe you don't like this running line. Maybe you want to try something a little different. So I like to have a system where I can disconnect the two. Okay, back to the anatomy here. So I've got my shooting head, and my shooting head is going to be anywhere from 12 to 15 feet long, and it loops to loops on there. So if you're setting up your own system, you're going to get a running line, and if you buy a reel from us and a line from us, it's going to come all connected, right? But now what I can do is I can take my running line here, and I'm going to go ahead and put this back on, and I'm going to take my shooting head, and I just like to, it's so short with a longer head. For some of my other rods, I might not run it all the way through. I might put it back through in a bunch, and I'm going to run this out, pull my sink tip through there, and we're just going to put this line together. So basically I just took the shooting head off and put it back on. It's really easy. You can do it literally while standing in the river if you needed to. Okay, so now I've got my shooting head back together. Voila. And that loop-to-loop connection just seats down just like that. There's going to be another video coming up just says getting started in Trout Spey, and that's going to be how to cast, how to swing, how to present a fly, and all that. And this is going to be stripped up, and this will hang outside my rod tip, this connection, when I cast. So until I reel in a fish, this connection won't go through my rod tip. Well, out here at the end of the head, the Skagit style line is not complete until there's a sink tip on the end. Okay, it is assumed, I should say floating tip or sink tip. Most of us are using sink tips. It is assumed when we use a Skagit style line that we're going to use a 10 to 12 foot tip on the end of it. Okay, so it's assumed that in order for this line to be complete, it has to have this. It will not cast. If I just put leader on the end of this head, not going to work. Okay, it's going to be incomplete. It's going to be too short. It's going to be too light. So I'm going to add a tip that has X amount of weight in order to complete the system. Okay, and then at the end of the sink tip, what I've got going here is this is really simple, and hopefully that shows up on video. It comes with loops on the end. So my sink tip loops to loop. It has a loop-to-loop connection that ties it to the end of the shooting head, and then there's another loop, and this one is typically all black, so it's discreet, and then I can loop-to-loop tip it on the end right there. When it comes to tip it, I'm a pragmatist. I generally run 1X fluorocarbon tippet, and I do a triple surgeon's loop, and I loop-to-loop my tippet directly on there. And so let's just pretend I have a spool of tippet here. So I got my tippet, I rig up my loop-to-loop connection, or I tie my loop up rather, and I tie a triple surgeon's loop approximately that big. Hopefully you can see that. And then I just take it and I loop-to-loop it right onto here, just like that. And I run anywhere from 3 to 5 feet of tippet. In clear water, really open runs where the fish can see well, I might run 5 feet of just straight tippet, no taper to it. In dirtier water, or where it's a little bit tighter, where I really need to have control, I might run as short as 2.5 feet. So that varies a little bit. And that's how my tippet system works. And you can use a tapered leader if you're a beginner. You could use, say, a 6-foot tapered leader, or you could tie a little heavier piece here and splice it in. That's up to you. It really doesn't matter too much. As a more advanced caster, I do fine with no taper. It'll turn over. It's a short leader anyways. Okay. So that's kind of how my Spey line works. You have Skagit style heads that are integrated. You have Skagit style heads that are modular, where I can take them on and off. Both of which are going to require some type of tip. The tip can be sinking or it can be floating. Okay. Now when it comes to sink tips, there are a bunch of varieties. You can use the OPST system. You can use the Rio system. It really doesn't matter. There's lots of great choices. One thing I do want to suggest that everybody have in their kit bag is a Rio Mo tip that's partial floating, partial sink tip. Okay. This is for use when I need to have mending control of my line and I want a short little sink tip, okay? But, as we talked about, that Skagit system is not complete without a sink tip or a tip that is long enough to add the appropriate amount of mass to the line and keep me attached to the water so that my cast works nice. And that Rio Mo tip comes in a variety of floating and sinking combinations. And what that does, that allows me to hang my fly behind rocks, logs, ledges, mend, and know right where my fly is at. So I can kind of reach out there, and my line might be level across all the current, and then dive really fast down to my fly like that. The Mo tip is nice to have control. With these longer sink tips, sometimes I wonder where my fly is and what it's doing. As a beginner, I think it's a really great thing to have. And for all Trout Spey applications, you'll be in the Mo light category, and that is the traditional Skagit Mo tip, okay? And that is a 5 and 5, 5 floating, 5 sinking. It's a really nice tool to have in your bag. Now, when it comes to running lines, okay, there are a couple of different running line options. I'm not going to go through all of them, but fundamentally I want to teach you the two main options here, okay? And there's links to all this in the video description. This is traditional running line. It's a Rio metered running line so that it alternates in colors. It's nice to have on my Trout Spey rod. I don't think it's absolutely necessary. This is more like a traditional fly line feel. I can grip it. It's a little sticky. I can strip the line. It's easy to handle, okay? And I think it's like an 032 size. That's pretty standard. There's one skinnier, but I like the 032 for ease to handle. Now, the other option is monofilament running line. So the thinner and lighter this is, the easier I can cast, and it'll shoot out because it's light and thin and slick, and I can make my cast and that shooting head develops, trajectory, and the running line gets towed behind. The slicker and skinnier your running line, the easier distance is going to be for a whole bunch of reasons. This is a flat monofilament running line. It shoots like you wouldn't believe. It is greased lightning, okay? And that is the OPST laser line, all right? It shoots unbelievably well, especially if you're a beginner that wants some easy distance. I think the laser line is a really nice choice, okay? It's very thin. Now, why wouldn't everybody want to use laser line all the time? It's a little bit harder to grip, especially in the cold weather with gloves on. It does have a little bit of memory to it. When you make a cast and that line is shooting out, it does have a little bit greater tendency to want to jump around the reel or around the back of the rod when you're shooting it. So it's a little bit more lively in that sense. More experienced casters typically don't need the aid of the thin running line to achieve good distance. But I do have to tell you, I was fishing with, I don't have mono on any of my current setups, and I was fishing mono the other day. It reminded me how nice I had it for when I'm making awkward casts where I'm casting maybe off my left shoulder and I've got some brush behind me and I'm abbreviated on my stroke a little bit. That mono makes it quite a bit easier to pull off those tough casts with ease. So there's pros and cons between the two. So kind of in summary, I'm gonna wrap all this up. Thanks for watching this long video, but there's a lot to unpack here. We've got different parts to the system. You're gonna choose your rod weight and length. Got a favorite brand, go there first. The more you spend, the more you get. Action is not nearly as important in Trout Spey. The actions really don't vary. All Skagit style rods are really meant to bend down in the butt and be able to catapult that line out with ease. The running line itself, we went over like traditional mono or traditional fly line style, easier to grip, doesn't shoot as well. Every line is made up of several parts. Running line, shooting head, and on Skagit style lines, you have to have some kind of tip, whether it's a Mo tip or just a straight sink tip, you gotta have a tip on there. Mono running line, like the laser line, shoots much easier. Reels, if you can get a full frame reel, anything in the Lamson HD family is great because it's full frame. There's some that are expensive, there's some that are cheaper. But a full frame reel appropriate for a 7-weight rod on Trout Spey is great. So I think that pretty much wraps it up. Hit all the links in the description below. Put together a Trout Spey setup, and I'll be doing another video on just getting started. The first few things that you want to do when you get your new Trout Spey rod.